Welcome, everyone, to episode 26 of Caster Calls with ZombieGrub. I am here with Frodan, who is another one of those guys that came up with StarCraft for the most part and then
That's
moved
right.
on to become even more famous as the esports went on as well. So thank you very much for coming on. I know you've been doing great work with Hearthstone, but I feel like I see you occasionally doing other stuff as well. I see your name pop up every now and again. So it seems like esports has really been working out well for you. So that's really awesome. But like I said, you started with StarCraft. So how long's it been since
That's
you've done
right.
that?
How long has it been since I worked a StarCraft show? I guess like if you count as an organizer, I've worked on it as recently as like a year and a half ago, because I do a lot of work with Twitch rivals, and so part of my job purview is to like touch a lot of communities, and because they know that I have a lot of good StarCraft experience from the past, we ran a couple of events, which I believe that you even participated in one. So
Oh yeah.
it's definitely going to be really challenging to say like if I know much about StarCraft currently, just because I tune in every now and then to kind of the major tournaments that's happening, especially the World Championships. So StarCraft means a lot to me just because of how much it was part of my life growing up in the industry, and so it always has a special place in my heart.
Yeah. Yeah. That seems to be a lot of people's I guess views on it. They'll be like, yeah, I definitely want to watch, the big stuff come around, but everyone's so busy with all the other esports that have popped up. It's really transformed from the year 2010 when StarCraft 2 was released to where we are now in 2021. And you've been along for the ride for basically most of that time. So, go ahead and give us like I guess a brief overview of the life of Frodan and how you got into esports and how you got into StarCraft to start things off.
Yeah, I'm trying to fix the little fade going on as I like Thanos is snapping at me and I'm disappearing as we speak in this podcast. So a little bit about my background and history. I started off first observing esports as a fan and an aspiring competitor, like most people, like a failed professional gamer, loves being involved in the community, loves talking about the game, has a little bit of stage or theater experience in the past. Very common starter story, like a beginner pack, if you will, for a lot of these commentators. So, I grew up in the MLG circuit. I really followed a lot of their console gaming, like Halo and Call of Duty, and I participated in a lot of their events. And I remember watching Chris Puckett for the very first time on TV on the USA Network in 2006, I think. That was back when like Halo 2 was on TV for cable networks, and I just thought, wow, like I can't believe people actually talk over video games like they're sports commentators. That sounds really fun because I love doing that just when my friend's sitting next to me on the couch. And so in the back of my mind, I always thought, hey, one day that'd be super sweet to try and actually make as a career, do it for fun. I didn't actually even really think about it as a career choice. It was just more like I think this is a really cool activity and hobby that I'd love to explore. No different than if you see all these other cool little hobbies and things that you pick up along the way. And then as time went on, I started becoming more involved as a tournament organizer because I realized that a lot of people don't really like doing a lot of the nitty gritty detail work in order to get people organized. They usually just say, hey, come over and just do whatever. And so I organized a lot of events locally through my university and college campuses, and I got involved with the CSL, the Collegiate Star League. And from there, I started streaming our practices because not everyone could come meet at the same time and be online. So some people had to watch while doing classes and whatnot. And from there, just started providing commentary, and people were like, oh, you're pretty good at it. It's really fun to listen to you. You should try to explore more. So I started actually trying to cast from that point on. What a journey that was, because that's like 11, 12 years ago now. And it's hopefully not going to stop anytime soon. I love what I do, and I hope I can keep doing it for as long as I can.
Yeah, that's the hope. It seems to be, I guess, increasingly more realistic as time goes on, as more and more developers put all this money into the esport for a long term investment, right? But can be a very very difficult path to traverse because esports even today is still relatively new, but then certainly back in 2010 it really was truly the wild west. Lots of underhanded things were happening. People were promising things and then just not delivering. Teams would literally just like flee. Like people would just be like, where'd they
Yeah.
go? I don't know. It was in some ways kind of a terrible time, but in other ways like one of the most exciting opportunities ever because it felt like really everyone had a shot. Of course you had the guys coming from Brood War who also just had this gregarious nature, that the tasteless 89 and control, like, they were just destined to become the greats. But it felt like you could do a whole lot. It exploded. It really exploded with StarCraft 2, and you kind of were along for the ride. So you get involved on the ground level, like many people do. You just kind of fall into it, doing it as a hobby. It's a very familiar story. But then
Mhm.
eventually you became one of the faces of the new commentators, if you will. Again, not the tastostesses. So and getting involved with NASL as well, which was one of our first, long running
Ah,
leagues that might have ended a little rough, but still at the time was supposed to be this great adventure, this something that was supposed to stick and stay. And anyways, you got involved with that. So how did you get
yeah,
involved with
yeah.
that, and how did it go?
So NASL was my first full-time gig in the sports industry. I've been offered other gigs prior to that. I was, recruited to potentially make StarCraft 2 informational videos for educational purposes on, websites that people want to learn. So I would record like 3 4 minute videos on how to do stuff in StarCraft 2 and improve as a player. But that wasn't really a full-time gig, and it didn't even last very long. And then I would cast like online weekly cups for a while. So NASL was the first like real full-time offer, and it was very, very low pay. It was below minimum wage. And the really big thing that stood out to my mind was Russell Pfister at the time, who, I'm eternally grateful for Russ for giving me that first opportunity. He saw me cast one time because Duran Parsi, who was the commissioner at NASL, also the owner of the Collegiate Star League, I knew him through college, through UCSD. And he knew that I wanted to cast and get more involved in the industry. And I always harassed him a lot because Duran had like all these connections. He was, like I said, the commissioner of NASL. He was a creator of the CSL, the Collegiate Star League. He was also a manager of Fnatic at the time, the Fnatic StarCraft team. And so I felt like, hey, anything you need ever, there's like, please let me know. And he knew that I was very enthusiastic. And so one day they didn't have a commentator to fill during the preseason of NASL. They, I think at the time, Jeff in Control Robinson, he was transitioning away from NASL at that time, and they were hiring like Mr. Bitter in Rotterdam. So they were looking for a fourth caster, and they're trying all different kinds of people out. I think most notably like Caldor was like, trying out, and other people had kind of walked in. I think even Kevin Naki may have even tried out at the time. And these were like the rising casters of that generation. And so one day they couldn't find a sub, and Duran was the one who was slotted to cast. And Duran's like, I don't want to cast. Who can I ask that'll like definitely come up all the way from San Diego to Los Angeles, like which is like a 2 3 hour drive, and show up this morning to cast this random StarCraft preseason day of games. And he was like, oh, I know, I'll call Frodan. He's definitely like a guy that'll always do it. And so he called me and he said, hey, Frodan, are you busy? And this was like a Tuesday morning or so, or sometime during the week. And I had class and I had an exam in like 2 hours. And I was like, I'm not doing anything, Duran. What do you need? What can I do? And he's like, if you come over like immediately, you can cast today's games of StarCraft 2 at NASL for the preseason. And I said, sure, I'll be there. And I told my professor I can't make it. I just made up some BS excuse. The professor said, if you don't show up, you fail the exam. I said, okay, cool, noted. And I went and casted some StarCraft 2 at the NSL studios in Rancho Cucamonga. And then I drove all the way back after I went and met with them. But the cool thing that was really fun was just the idea that at that time, it was just a dream, right? I was just trying to pursue it with all my heart. And that very same day after I casted, Russ called me and said, hey, we're looking for casters. You're local, you're a rising talent. We have some established stars, and we really feel like you should join the team. But you need to join in 2 to 3 weeks from now. And I said, my semester or my quarter isn't finished yet, and I'm graduating my university in like a month. Can you just wait an extra few weeks so that I can graduate, get my degree, and make it feel like investing in education wasn't a scam, even though it kind of is? And he said, no, we have to move because the season starts. You'll be joining halfway through the season. Doesn't make sense. So if you don't take this offer now, we're going to move on. And so, coming from a Asian American household, education and the pursuit of academic excellence is like a really big thing, as well as to get involved in a respectable field according to what their standards. And so to tell them that I was going to leave university like 12 credits from finishing, which is like a month and a half, 2 months away, and pursue gaming, an unestablished industry, which seemed to be like a waste of time, and make less than minimum wage, made them really, really, really hesitant to say yes. And so I told them that, I actually took it more seriously than anything that I had taken before, which was I built like a 5-year business plan and like all the different things that I was, considering and all the factors of like why I kind of like built my impromptu deck for my parents to pitch them why they should let me do this. And my mom eventually said, okay, fine. In 6 months, if the season ends, because that's kind of where I got contracted just for one season. If the season ends and it's not going to work out, and you promise you'll go back to school and finish your degree. And then, because at the time I was kind of on course to try to pursue law school and maybe like do some other graduate studies. And I said, absolutely, like just give me a chance. And that 6 month contract got extended for a year, and then one step led to another, and like all of these different dominoes started falling. And I don't know, that was like I said, like a decade ago, and here we are today.
Dang.
So the NASL journey was quite an interesting start. I kind of just at the time YOLO'd and just said, I'm young, I'm 21, I'm totally okay to make this kind of mistake, but I definitely don't want to like ask what if or have any regrets not doing something and going all out.
That's still a very insane story. I mean, most people would just like, cautious and be like, if I got one chance, maybe I get another. But it really was an emerging industry where a lot of the time it was just like kind of luck. People in the right positions. They
Totally,
had their
totally.
parents to kind of fall back on. They had already maybe just finished college. Is kind of my thing. It's like I finished university when I started kind of ramping up, so I was like, oh, I'm a bit free. Um, so it's a lot about timing. Absolutely. So you took your shot and obviously it paid off.
Yeah. I think that, a lot of times people look at that and, luck does play a big factor, but I also got rejected so many times before getting to that point. I applied to like literally everything. That's the reason why like Duran knew that I'd be saying yes, because I was very annoying and persistent and enthusiastic and willing and showing up. And it's one of those things too, like for better or for worse, this is actually a really common trend for people who are high quality and also unfortunately people who are very low quality in the industry, is that if you just keep showing up, opportunities will present themselves. And that's actually, reflected in, like the bad ways, like team owners who don't pay their players, like
Mm.
they just keep showing up, and players who want to make the dream happen keep believing in them. That's like the one side. But the other side of the story is, really annoying badgering people like me who just really want to break out in the industry, just kept trying. Like I applied to so many different things. I remember like IPL and GOM TV and GSL and MLG. Like I tried so hard, and all I could get was a one time. I paid for my own trip and my own accommodations to an MLG event where I got to work with on the B stream with like Rob Simpson back then.
Yeah.
And so that was like my crowning achievement for like 18 months or 24 months grinding nonstop. I was like, oh yeah, that one time I casted MLG for free backstage with like no one watching stream number 4. That was my claim to fame. And I think that a lot of people focus so much on the success and not understanding that there's a huge process that prepares you along the way if you're willing to put in the time.
Yeah. No, it's definitely a very good point. Do you think that that same let's call it like earnestness, like the badgering of people, will actually fly in today's world? Do you suggest this path for anyone out there?
No, I'm being a little bit tongue in cheek. I didn't really badger people. I'm always a big believer of like paying it forward. Treat other people the way you want to be treated. So I always was very respectful. I wasn't like, there's a lot of drama actually within casting circles even today, where people try to step over a peer or a colleague, or even just do some like underhand tactics, like don't hire ZombieGrub. I'll do it for half her price. And I also like look at all these like community threads that people like hate on her. There's a little bit of that going on in different circles. Luckily, I haven't really been in those circles or like getting attacked by them. But I never really did any of that stuff. So I'm not encouraging people to go out and just like harass and call them nonstop or DMs. But I think that if you're asking, what can people do today to break out if they want to be a commentator and they want to like make it in this industry as primarily like talent on camera, is pretty much that, like showing up and working on your craft, honing in, really showing passion. I personally believe that you can't really fake it without people knowing in this industry. It's part of the reason why like streaming and gaming content has truly exploded and will continue to rise up is because a lot of times we are ourselves. Maybe there's a little bit more polish nowadays because there's more on the line with sponsors and brand deals and all these different activations. But for the most part, like, you don't really get this kind of access with anybody else. Any kind of like influencer, celebrity, or athlete, all these different people, they have this giant wall. You can't really talk to them. But streaming and social media, we're so interactive and we're so genuine to each other in the first place, is why a lot of these successful content creators are as are the stars that they are. So, I believe that if you're commentating, you're trying to just like, I just want to be a caster. I'll just like do anything I want, or any gig that I can get, and I'll just like try to make myself as palatable to the audience as possible. I think that's actually going to sabotage them in the short term and the long term. So I just encourage you to really like pursue your passion more than anything, because it'll really exude on camera, and then people will really gravitate towards that.
Yeah, it's kind of a interesting topic, as kind of a little tangent to it, I guess, like parallel to it. It's just that the idea of esports has always been that like a bunch of nerds who liked the game got together, and then a few that were better on camera were able to become these like rising stars. But they all started with this same passion of a video game. And nowadays, it's a little bit different. We are having more people kind of come from more of like even a technical background and say like, "Hey, I also like video games." When it used to be the reverse, you liked video games and also you kind of could talk well. Now it's sometimes the reverse of things. So, but it's interesting because I think we are at that point where we were at that point back in StarCraft where like passion could really get you to a lot of places. If you weren't passionate about
Yeah.
StarCraft, and this is a big critique against us even still, like get the fuck out. Like if you like Hearthstone as well, why don't you go do Hearthstone? Get out. Like, and it's not great, but even though StarCraft was most well known for that sentiment, it is kind of pervasive across all esports. If a guy from
Mhm.
Call of Duty goes over to Overwatch or whatever, there's a little bit of like, no, like our people first, right? Like they got to get up
Mhm,
there,
mhm.
and that's a really difficult point of I think today's esports scene, which you're still successfully navigating. But like, how did you move into other esports? Because specifically for you, you were that guy who was starting to get into one of these casual games from StarCraft. We want to hold on to our
Oh
people.
yeah.
So you had that. You had the whole like, well, if I break away, maybe StarCraft won't like me anymore. And you had Hearthstone people that might be coming up before you, right? So
Right.
how did you navigate that, 6 or whatever years ago?
That wasn't something that I intended. It's something that came up as an opportunity, and I decided to lean into it instead of struggle against it.
Mm,
I think that a lot of times people always wonder like where they should be going, and a lot of times I'm a big believer that the door will open, and it's up to you to like try to walk through it. And so what happened was I casted StarCraft for NASL for a solid year, and we already started working on other games. It wasn't even necessarily like my choice to start moving on to different esports, because our studio got contracted by World of Tanks, and so we were splitting our time. This is very infamous, by the way the NASL handled the WGL and WCS at the same time. I was casting two games at once, and the tanks committee loved it. They said, "Hey, like you have a really great presentation style for tanks as well. Like you can do other different games, even if it's a completely different genre, right? Like tanks is like a third person vehicle shooter. It's not necessarily like StarCraft, although they have similar like macro ideas." And so at that time, I kind of realized that I could do different things. And so we tried a bunch of different other games. We started a news show on NASL called The Pulse, and we ended up reviewing a bunch of games and even providing like commentary during like these highlight clips. And I was covering League of Legends. And what people don't really know during that time was that before I got hired at NASL, I actually had given up a little bit on the StarCraft dream, because, like I said, 18 to 24 months, I tried so hard to break out and nothing was really working. So what I ended up doing, and League of Legends was rising up during that time, and I was actually casting more League than I was casting StarCraft when I got that offer from NASL. And I'd played so much, right? I like, part of the reason why I was already kind of okay not doing well in college because I already was doing a lot more poorly because I was grinding so much League of Legends every day. And so my goal at the time had adjusted, like, oh, I'll try to pursue something in this game, and I love it. And so I already naturally had started collecting a little bit of that experience slowly. And I partially believe that, the more you explore those different avenues, you don't really understand how valuable that experience is until you really needed it. And so when I left NASL, I got a job offer to go to Germany to become a news anchor because we were doing news shows on NASL, which is, by the way, I want to say as a small aside, the vision that that company had it's just so unfortunate that they were so far ahead of the curve that they got squeezed out because NASL got bought by ESL America, which became split off from NGE, which now became Vindex and now owned by Esports Engine, and they produce like the majority of North American top level broadcasts right now in esports. So it's just like 5 steps a little bit too early, but definitely visionaries to say the least. Um, but I got a job offer to be a news anchor in Germany for because I thought that was what I wanted to do. I love storytelling. That's partially why I love. Well, that's the big reason why I love commentary in game. And so I thought I wanted to do like, the pitch was do 30 for 30 ESPN documentaries on different esports players. I'm like, oh, sweet. I can go to Flash in Korea and interview him, in his PC bong or wherever his team house that he trains in with KT Ulster and definitely like get that experience. And that was the way it was framed and pitched. When I was at that studio, we needed to find different programs to launch. And so obviously I was involved in the StarCraft scene. I knew stuff from League of Legends. And at the time, one of the new hit games that released was Hearthstone. And I already had the in because I was familiar with Blizzard. And so they passed me a beta key. And I was not interested. When Hearthstone was announced at PAX in 2013, I was like, this looks like kids' Magic the Gathering. And it looks, I think card games are too expensive. These other different things. I was not interested. Everyone's like, oh, you're going to play Hearthstone? I was like, nah, I'm good. And then I remember getting the key and I just couldn't stop playing for months straight. I just grinded nonstop. When I wasn't really doing work, I was constantly playing Hearthstone. And I went to the studio and said, I think Hearthstone is going to be like a really good product for us to produce. And so we contacted a StarCraft caster, Artosis, Dan Stemkowski, and said, hey, would you like to build a StarCraft program with us? And he said, absolutely. Like, we offered him a really good deal. We gave him full control over how it would be shot and filmed. And it was a really successful product at the time. We pre-recorded esports tournaments for Hearthstone, which is just kind of weird at the time. It's still kind of even is weird today. No one really pre-records tournaments and then airs it on Twitch. But we did it and we got like 60 to 70,000 viewers, right? That was like a really big successful product. And I wasn't really intending on doing anything Hearthstone related. I just wanted to put it on. I was not even casting it. I was just like, I was the showrunner from the production side. And slowly over time, I got more involved in Hearthstone. And what's really unfortunate is that the studio ended up closing, right? There's like this whole drama between the people that owned the studio that I was at. It was called ESGN. They also owned uh, Zubu, the streaming service
Yeah.
platform, and global esports management called GEM, and that was like their three prong media empire, right? Like agency, production company, and streaming platform. And it all collapsed because startups fail, and that's what happened. So I was kind of stranded in Germany, and I had like €1,000 and rent was like €500, and I was like, wow, I have to go home soon or I'm gonna be broke slash homeless in Germany. But I can't really like accept my fate because that's only been like 2 years removed, and my parents are like, well, you're gonna go back to school, or hey, you can come live with us. And I'm like, I'm like, hell no, I'm not gonna do that. So what I did was I picked up the phone and I went back to my roots and I called everybody I knew. And I said, hey, look, I don't have a job anymore. And I anything that you can get me as a gig, I will do. I promise I'll study and I'll always do my best. Um, and that's how I started getting Hearthstone gigs. It was like I had to pay my way a majority of the time in the early days, and it was just getting started. But Thankfully, through that kind of persistence, a lot of luck because one of the persons that I talked to was Artosis and Nimsh at the time, and they were helping me along the way. And that's how I started getting involved in the Hearthstone scene. And then Blizzard eventually contacted me and said, "Hey, would you like to come cast BlizzCon? We'll pay for your air ticket back to the US." I said, "Oh, okay, that's actually great. Buy a one-way ticket because I can't afford to have my visa renewed in Germany. So I'm going to move back to the US." And that's how I got involved in Hearthstone. And then from there, just kind of kept snowballing. So it was not intentional whatsoever to answer your question. It's just kind of something that happened by circumstance. And I also loved the game too, right? It's one of my favorite games of all time, and it felt like something that was really authentic. And I think that's why it worked out as well. If I got contracted to work in a space that I didn't feel great in, I didn't like the game, then I think it would have completely flopped, and I probably would be going back to law school at that time and being really unhappy with how everything panned out.
That's absolutely wild ride. It's episode 26, and I'm still getting, like, these very interesting stories. I think you're one of the rare few who can say that, like, they kind of failed, even multiple times and still managed to pick themselves up and continue going, and obviously their failure was, not because they couldn't do well. It just was the circumstances outside their control, which is awesome that you're able to bring it back. It's absolutely fantastic. Did you
Thank you.
feel kind of weird doing those calls? I mean, was it just purely fueled by this, like, I'm never gonna go back home, I wanna do esports, like, I don't care? Or is there a little bit of just like, "Oh, I can't believe I'm doing this, I have to call all these
Yeah.
people?"
Definitely a lot of that stubbornness. I have that rebellious side. I don't really, I don't really like, listening to people, and I thrive off of people's doubt. And so a little bit of that, just being young and, bullheaded. But the other part of it was, like I really felt like there was something special about what I was doing. Like, you mentioned passion, and I know that passion is like a real big buzzword within the StarCraft community for a long time. But like, I truly do have passion for what we do. I like believe in what gaming represents as a vehicle for like social interaction and community. And how we connect. Like, I have friends from all parts of the world that I would never have met if it wasn't for this industry. And it's like every corner of the globe. We're talking about like in Oceania, like Australia, New Zealand. I've met like some of my closest friends there, and the Middle East, parts of Africa. Like I've never would have met these fans and friends and basically people that I consider part of my family, extended family, without it. And I think that just made me really want to stay super badly. Like the party isn't over just yet. I want to have a little bit more fun, at least until the sun rises, and leave it out on the court. So I think that that kind of mentality, as long as you're obviously not trying to hurt people and step on them as you're trying to go along your journey. I think that that really shows, and that I think that's kind of missing a little bit right now because just as a small aside too, it sounds very like old guard or boomer to say, but there's a lot of people who are like primarily financially driven right now. Um, in a lot of their activities, like a lot of things isn't really about for fun anymore, and I value having fun more than anything else right now. When it comes to my career, and I get the luxury to do that because I've already grinded a huge amount of time for like the things that weren't fun. But I still think that at its core, that was what I always wanted to do, which was like talk about games and share that with other people who love games.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of like, yeah, I get what you mean. Right now as we speak, there's a lot of like Valorant drama, because people were already like locked into the region for casters,
Right.
and other people, didn't, basically is the truth of it. So there's a bit of drama going on there, but it is kind of it's hard to say like, one that like only passionate people from the bottom of the game can be risen up right now because they are trying to push esports really fast. They can't just take some guy who has no on air experience and be like, well, you're really good at this game. Go talk about it. And then for the people who are getting these jobs who are like doing cross game stuff, like some of them may not be totally passionate, like risen up from the game again, but you can't really blame them, especially for some of the people who have had they literally had to move on, either because there were
Mhm.
no more jobs in the esport that they wanted to primarily be in, or because they saw disasters that can happen when a company just stops caring, right? I mean, that's that's kind of where StarCraft is at. We're like, it's like, well, we have no idea what's going to happen because, well, our company never really cared about us in an esports sense. Like, obviously, they gave us money and they cared about us for a little while, but we never gave money back to them. We're not, advertising skins, not nearly as much as
Right.
a
Right.
Riot League of Legends would be, anyways. So anyway, so it's it's understandable when these people are like, their primary concern is like, I want to have a family, I want to be able to buy a house, and I want to do it with esports. And in order to do that, I have to be very versatile. And I was actually talking to my chat about this, and they made a very good point. It actually is kind of starting to reflect the real world a little bit, where all you ever hear is that people have to move on from a job. You can't just stay in one company anymore because they'll try to like screw you over and keep you like, capped out from the guys who make a lot of money. So most people are like staying in a job, a company for like 2, 3 years, and then they move on to another one. And then they negotiate with another one, and then negotiate with another one. And apparently that's like the way it goes. I talked to a lot of people who live in like California, for instance. And it seems
Right.
like esports is kind of becoming a little bit like that, where you can't actually put all of your eggs in one basket because it's the most passionate basket, even though
Yeah.
it's worked out for you
Totally.
so far. You really have to think about moving into other stuff, which is sad because it does take away a little bit of that what most esports commentators come up with, which is that passion. Almost everyone who's big now on the scene came up because they were passionate about one sport or another. But now they do kind of have to look at it like, well, this is a business. I'm part of it. So I gotta mind my future. And it's difficult. And which is, again, we brought that up with the whole passion thing earlier on, but it's a real struggle. It feels like esports in I
Yeah.
guess a lot of ways, in fact, is losing some of its heart, to be dramatic.
Yeah. Yeah. No doubt. I think that, you know, you bring up a really good point, right? Like it is real life. Only a few are going to be able to succeed. That's partially how it just everything works, right? Not everyone can be a commentator. Or like can be just like what they want to be in the industry. Not everyone can be a top pro player. Not everyone can be like, you know, the top production company or graphic artist or whatever you want to do. I think that, but sorry, what I want to back up to say is the number one common denominator though of everybody that has succeeded is that they were super passionate and they put in the time and they worked super hard. Like, I think, I love the fact that first of all, I really love that you're doing this series. I think it's really great that you're providing it. And I love the fact that you're so pure and loyal to the StarCraft community, because I think, it's something that I know that community values deeply, even to the point where they question their own commentators, right? Like, there's people for a long time that would say, like, hey, is Tasteless still liking StarCraft? And like, the year is 2021. The man is still casting StarCraft too. You think he doesn't like the game where he's passionate about it? Like, it's that kind of stuff always rubbed me the wrong way when people would question that. Like, people like Tasteless have put in some of the most work and suffering and sacrifice in order to get to where he was, where he like broke his leg in Korea and he didn't have the money to pay for it. So he just lived in Korea with a broken leg for a long time. That kind of stuff is always so heartwarming for me to realize that he suffered a lot to try to pave the way for me, and likewise I can pay it forward to other people. And so, yeah, like I don't want people to like listen to this podcast or listen to other commentators and think like, oh, all I have to do is be really passionate and work hard. That doesn't guarantee you success, but that is a mandatory prerequisite in order to get to, where people like me and the rest of other people are in the industry.
Yeah, no, for sure. That's the number one thing that still gets, complimented. Or still even it kind of creates the bar even, where if someone tries to come in really too fast, people will be like, well, slow down. Like, yeah, you've only been here for 6 months. You're good, but like, we've been here 7 years, so like calm down. Yeah, that type of stuff. Obviously that's a StarCraft thing, but other esports will be like, I've been here six
Yeah.
months, you've only been here 1 month, so calm down. You're like, all right. But
Sure.
anyways, so yeah, it's still the number one thing that people compliment. Obviously, different scenes can be a little bit different, and I want to bring it back to your story. You were very active around. Well, what years would you actually say that you had started to transition to Hearthstone? Because I don't remember at all when that came out.
Yeah. No, it's a valid question. So Hearthstone came out in 2013, and I remember watching Total Biscuit, another legend that is no longer with us, but I respect deeply and was a good friend. And Kevin Naki was casting Hearthstone at BlizzCon, and I remember thinking that I love these guys, but they are definitely not doing it for me right now. Only because they primarily weren't like Hearthstone experts, and that's totally fine because it was a new game at the time. And so I was thinking like, oh, I would love to one day like be able to do that at the stage of BlizzCon. And so I did. So I worked Hearthstone for 2014 until now, so it's about 7 years, going on 8. And Hearthstone's in a great spot. I think that the game has a lot more growth opportunity. I think that card games actually age really well compared to other games. Like I don't think people will be playing Overwatch in 10 years nearly the way they're playing Hearthstone. Maybe Overwatch will still exist, especially if the rumors about Activision saying like, oh, every year you're going to put out another Overwatch like Call of Duty. We'll see. The main point though is that I've been working in this space for a while as a Hearthstone commentator, but I'm also interested in other stuff too. I'm a big believer in like connecting bridges and communities. So I dabble a lot in other games. I think most recently people have seen me a lot covering Teamfight Tactics for Riot, which is an auto battler. And that's been really fun because it's kind of adjacent to card games. It's like a strategy game that's you have to basically mitigate variance and risk constantly. So it's got a little bit of that, card game or RNG factor. I've been covering Valorant a little bit at the same time as well, which is really cool because it's such a departure from what I'm used to doing in the past half decade plus, which is instead of 1v1 games of chance, it's like 5v5 team games of like skill and coordination, and brings me back to the old days of competing in shooter games. And also, I like, I'm a big Super Smash Brothers fan. I got a chance to cast Evo before the quarantine hit, and also before Evo imploded because of some of the drama last year. So it's I really love just what the industry is, and so I try to explore a lot of those different avenues. So I think a lot of people think of me as just like a Hearthstone guy, but I really like everything around the space genre wise.
Yeah. Well, that explains why I feel like I see you everywhere because I do follow like other people who are doing TFT and a little
Yeah.
bit of the Super Smash. So that's pretty awesome though. Seems like you're doing a lot of things somewhat successfully in building those opportunities, which are definitely important without having to stick to it too.
Hmm, hmm.
But yeah, so you were really active. I was gonna guess 2013, but I didn't actually know. Um, and that just kind of felt like that was also kind of the start of Heroes of the Storm, right? Um,
Right.
and I always saw Heroes of the Storm as the first esport where I saw the clamoring. I saw the people trying to push others down to get a leg up to an esport because they thought it was what Blizzard was going to put all their money into, which to be fair, they did for the first year as apparently an Overwatch test run, but then they quickly discarded it, and that article that was written about it was fascinating yet terrible. But anyways, you had gone through this, and you even touched on it earlier in the podcast where you're like there are still some circles that don't aren't so fantastic. What have you learned, I guess? Have you actually, not to name names here, but have you actually seen these people who are doing the undercutting and the backstabbing and the things that we just don't appreciate? How are they doing? Can you say that they are successful, or that they actually get pushed away? Can we be hopeful here, or is it actually
um,
just the way of the world?
I would say that the vast majority of them no longer work as talent on camera. Um, I won't name names, like you said, because there's no point. They're not even involved. Some of them are not even involved in the industry at all anymore because for whatever reason, right? Uh, it doesn't really pay off because, like we talked about at the very beginning of the show, people don't leave esports. They just find a way to stick around. I don't know how they keep finding opportunities, but you can definitely succeed upwards and you can definitely fail upwards. You can also keep going sideways and stay bouncing around jobs forever. People just don't leave because it's a really fun space. It's also a very ignorant space. People just tend to kind of stick within their circle. So if someone from a different circle all of a sudden enters a new scene, people like, you know what? That was like 9 months ago. Maybe they've changed. And it's like, well, surprise, surprise, they did not. But don't listen to me. Go watch Richard Lewis videos and whatnot. He'll constantly keep pointing out these inconsistencies and the ugly parts, the underbelly, if you will, of the industry, which I always respect. But in terms of like going back to your original question, like what happened to these people? Some of them continue to succeed for a little bit of time, and that was pretty sad to see, right? Like because in the short term, you always think about like how does this affect me? You take it very personally. Like they chose this person who clearly is manipulating the situation, and I feel like I'm being honest. Do I have to be dishonest in order to get ahead, or do I have to like completely change my strategy and do something that I don't even stand for, even if it's not necessarily ethically wrong? Just moral grounds at that point. And I think that I'm so glad that I had people in my camp tell me like, "Hey, just keep doing what you're doing, and the opportunities will come." And like, you want to make this a career. A career is not defined by 6 months. I mean, it can be, but it's usually sad when it is. It's always defined by how long you're able to do it at the end of it, and you look back about the years, the decades even of your work, and that's when you can kind of evaluate your career. And it's really easy, especially because I'm talking to this young guy right now. He's actually a 16-year-old aspiring Valorant caster. His name is Sully, and I first of all, he's near and dear to my heart because I don't think there's enough Asian talent on English broadcasts. They're usually players, right? Or, translators or hosts or whatnot, but there's not much of them on the desks nearly as much as I'd like to, considering how much we represent the industry. So there's very few of us. And so the fact that he really wants to do that, really spoke to me because I know he's trying to get his voice out there. Um, but he was telling me like about everything that's happened since Valorant came out, and Valorant's been out for little over like if you count the beta and the alpha stuff, it's like a year. And he's telling me about all this drama that's going on back behind the scenes. And I'm like, hey man, first of all, it's really funny because you are in quarantine and you're missing out on the high school experience, but thank God you're in esports, so you're getting the high school experience. But secondly, everything feels like it's crazy impactful because it's in the very beginning, and you're also like super young, so it feels like such a big portion of your life. A year is such a big deal when it's like you've only been involved in the industry for a year and a half. But over time, things are going to let history do all the talking. And so, keep doing your thing for all those aspiring casters out there. Like, because if you're good at what you do and you work hard, like just keep grinding. Eventually, those opportunities should present themselves, and when they do, definitely pounce on them and try to make the best of what you can.
It's so funny. I think I just watched that guy yesterday. He was on the Nerd Street Gamers Valorant for Challenger.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and, I mean, honestly, the first thing I thought because it was him and some guy with a redhead with a fro, I don't remember his name.
Up mine, up mine.
Yeah, the first thing I was just like, "Oh my god, that they're so young." Like, "Oh my god, I
They're
feel
so
so
young.
old, Jesus Christ." And the second thing that I noted was that they're actually really good, I went in
Mhm.
there, just kind of expecting, like, okay, but maybe not great. But, Nerd Street actually got some really aspiring talent. They're actually doing quite a good job. So it's really awesome to hear that I guess he's looking for stable guidance
Yeah,
from the
yeah, yeah.
industry leaders because honestly what I've learned is that a lot of the people leading the industry are there because they are actually very good people, which is nice. I'm certain that's not always the case, but I think it's mix. And people might
Yeah.
be like, "Oh, is Smix exactly as she appears? She's really nice." And I'm like, "Oh, she's even better. Actually, she's like super awesome, very helpful, very caring." Um,
Yeah, I agree. I love Sue on camera. I love Sue more off camera as well. She's super fun
yeah,
to hang out with.
yeah, but always willing to give advice. And that's something that
Mm.
obviously a kid like that. If he ever listens to this, I'm sure he'll hate being called a kid, but we're old enough that that actually makes sense. But anyways, like when you look towards, you got a promising start because like maybe there are a lot of young people listening to this. Like I think of StarCraft, which is actually a lot of people over the age of like 23. Actually, we have an older demographic. But there's so many people getting into esports who are actually very young. And if you've got some aspiring talent, if you're being, picked up for some things, yeah, definitely reach out to some of the industry leaders. I think they're actually be obviously with respect, but I think they'll be very willing to talk. So that's really awesome to hear. But yeah, on the kind of again with a little bit of a tangent, not quite, but in general, as we move away from the looking at the underbelly of esports, in general, what do you think are the qualities of a good caster? Not just the qualities of a person who can speak well, but I'm talking about what are the qualities of people you see constantly rehired?
Mhm.
What makes people like
Yeah. I think that's a really hard question. So the way I view being talent for an esports broadcast is that we are a multiplier effect onto what's happening on screen. And so a lot of times I think casters come onto camera thinking that they have to be the star of the show when I always feel like my job is to magnify what's happening in front of you. And it's really difficult. If you have like, if you're talking about math, right? If you have a low base number in front of you, let's talk about like an open qualifier with two randoms who are both playing random race in StarCraft and not in a competitive map pool. It's like that's just a really hard thing to make exciting if it's supposed to be high stakes. But when there's like big prize pool, lights and camera, offline land, it's 1v1, it's the IEM Katowice winner takes all $100,000 game. And it's like, what the heck, right? Like that's already such a like you don't need to make it any more exciting. It's already exciting, right? And I think a lot of talent really don't recognize those kinds of situations because they think they have to always be throwing out one line zingers. They have to constantly be memeing and caught up on inside jokes. They have to always be saying something super insightful that's even smarter than the player. Like, no, this is actually a mistake from this player, and I can't believe that they would ever do that. Like, this guy's a bum. And then I think that they get caught up on all those details and not realize that we're here just to kind of tell a really good story to the audience that's already bought it. Right? You don't have to convince most audiences to tune in and watch. You have to convince them to stay. And I think that's like one of the things that a lot of commentators I think miss because they're kind of caught up on the appreciation posts on Reddit or the social media, gratuity there or gratitude. Um,
Mhm.
and so I think that a lot of times I focus on that and it's case by case, right? Like sometimes if you're doing a qualifier for an event, you don't have to make it the most exciting thing. You want to talk a lot about like the journey of the players to get there. But if it's the big stage and there's $1 million prizing on the line and it's the championship, like really like make that moment big. Um, and I would say that that's what really makes a good caster is that they recognize the situation and rise to the occasion without taking too much away from what's happening on screen. Because remember, we're just the audio. That's at best 50% of what's happening on camera. So just try to keep up with the video portion.
I think that's personally my feelings as well, and also one that's I think shared very strongly by Uber, who I had on a couple episodes earlier, but he had similar sentiments where you kind of see you can see this as anyone in any stage of esports, I believe, where you can just see someone who is tryharding is like kind of the word I'm going to use, but one where they're like they want to make it about them, right? And they're tryharding in a negative sense. Not that they're trying hard, but they're tryharding, all right? Where they do everything, they kind of like they bring their books to all the important meetings and then leave their books so like at home during the actual study process type of thing, you know what I mean? And then on the camera, yeah, they kind of they try really hard to make the joke that makes people laugh, or they try really hard to break down this segment. They're gonna hit at 4:15 and then attack at 5 minutes and then get the upgrades, and it's just like it gets bogged down in stuff that's supposed to impress people. When really what impresses
Mhm.
people is just the fun almost. It's you are there to augment the thing on camera. The players who are doing this amazing thing, it's I think it's a typical story of everyone wants to be the quarterback when actually it's like the lineman that's doing a lot of the grunt work, right? Um,
Yep.
and hopefully one day, as a lineman, I suppose you eventually get people just going like, you know what, they're really solid. Like, oh shit, like I don't think they get enough respect, and that's an amazing feeling. But it's not nearly the same, adrenaline rush as when you do one thing great and then you get a Reddit thread about you. And you're like, "Oh my god, I need
Totally,
to do that
totally.
again." And with the praise, it feels so good. But it is, I think,
Mhm.
it's a hard balancing act though. As much as I'm like kind of making fun of the tryhards, it's hard to balance that out because you do want to put the work in, you know? Like we don't want to get to a
Oh,
point where we're
absolutely.
saying, stop trying and just get up there and say things about this guy doing great, We want people to put in the work. We want them to study. We want them to take notes, But I guess the difference is for me using that to supplement and using it as the only thing, I think is the difference. You come in with a notebook full of timings, don't actually bring them up on screen unless it's vitally important. So, but then you have the confidence to kind of tell the story of like, I know it's going to hit at 4:15 and then follow up at 5 minutes. So here's how I'm going to say it. I'm going to say, okay, this attack isn't the important attack, but the next thing happening is going to be really important, guys. Right? Like that's what you want to communicate on the camera more than
Mhm.
your specific knowledge. But it's hard. It's hard because so many people do really they clamor to celebrate the analysts, to celebrate the people who seem to know a lot about the
Yeah,
game. And they
true.
seem to easily disparage the people who don't know much about the game, right? So it's hard line.
Totally, totally. I completely agree, and I mean, I think at this point we might just echo chamber ourselves, which I think is always dangerous too, because there's a different perspective, right? Like, you know, while there's definitely people like us that value that kind of dynamic of adding onto the screen, instead of kind of making it about themselves. There's also some casters who just have this larger than life presence on camera, and we look at like Tastes and Artosis. I watched them cast Valorant actually. It was so good, but also like not good. Like
Yeah.
they didn't know what was happening on camera, but like I just was having a good time,
Mhm.
and I enjoyed that. And I think that that's a style that they have honed and refined and mastered, and trying to copy that actually is very dangerous, because not only are you going to do it worse, but you're probably going to embarrass yourself in the process trying to impersonate them. Speaking from firsthand experience, even, right? Like there's definitely times where like I talked to my co-casters when I was first starting StarCraft, like, look at what these guys are doing. Let's try to see if we can do something like that. And of course, that was just me fleshing out like what my style was, or different kinds of things I was trying out. So obviously, like I have my own ideologies, but that's working for me. The way I measure my own success is the post game discussion threads. If people had a really good time, when they say things like the finals was so good, the production was great, I love the stream quality, like that, I take that as a compliment. If they said that I did a great job, because I made that moment big for the fans, right? It's not I don't I, it's so interestingly self-serving and kind of narcissistic to like go into the NBA finals thread, and if I'm Marv Albert, or if I'm Kevin Harlan, or if I'm Joe Buck covering whatever, and going to these like threads where there's epic moments with LeBron James and Tom Brady, and expecting them to talk about me, like that's just ridiculous, right? But what happens without fail is, if those casters or commentators or whatever do a terrible job, they will be brought up. They're like, that was great, except I just wish Joe Buck would shut up, or I just wish that, Kevin Harlan would just turn off his voice. That's when I realize I'm getting the feedback, or constructive criticism of something that I can work on. I don't think comments always tell you what you should be doing, but they should definitely be pointing at something. They're like pain symptoms, right? You can't really point at what the actual problem is in your body, but pain tells you that you have to pay attention to that area in some capacity. And so, if you don't feel like if you're casting out there and you don't feel like you're getting those threads or appreciation or the feedback stuff, that's what you should be looking at, because those are very subtle compliments towards your commentary style and how you perform in that event.
Yeah, that's a good point. Again, it feels so great when someone's like, "The finals were great and also Tastosis were great," right? But,
Right.
more often than not, you kind of like, it seems to be a trend actually where, a newbie commentator kinda gets, like, initially praised, if they're good, of course, they get initially praised, and it levels off, and basically, at a certain point, all the commentators are like, I'm if no one's talking about me, I'm happy." And that sometimes is because that means there's no drama, but that also means because they're probably just doing a great job even that people don't really notice. So it can be a job that's not appreciated, I guess, often, but, I mean, it's all to me, I actually you shouldn't care about it anyways. I think you're right. If you read comments that are starting to say negative things, kind of take that all together and be like, all right, there's a trend. Okay, I need to work on something. But if there's nothing happening, then focus on other things, which is that you're not there to get the praise from the guys in chat. You're there usually to have fun with like your coworkers who you're usually friends with, to watch an exciting game that you also are really passionate about. So that's such a it's supposed to be the last thing on the list, right? That you really have to
Yeah.
care about. But it is so easy to care about it, isn't it? It's so easy to get the thread
It
and be
is,
like,
it
"Oh, it's
is.
amazing."
Especially because it feels like that public sentiment almost ties directly with, like, the likelihood that you'll be hired again,
Yeah.
for something, you know? Like, if you get, like, these big appreciation posts or this community sentiment behind you, you start to believe like this is the key to being successful, and almost no different than the key to being a successful streamer is getting just the numbers, or if you're an influencer, getting the clout, like getting the engagement, and that kind of stuff is really pervasive and actually takes away from your craft because what you're doing is you're serving a very active, very small vocal group, and you're kind of eventually going to realize when you stop and analyze the situation that you've neglected like this huge other group that actually didn't mind you or even appreciate you for what you did.
I mean, it's just like, to bring it down to a smaller scale, like sometimes you're hanging with friends, you make a joke and everyone laughs uproariously and you're like getting a lot of like good feelings and you try and make another joke, but because you tried, suddenly it just like falls
Yeah.
flat. It's kind of like that to a larger scale, right? Where you really have to be careful. Just because the one thing worked doesn't mean that it is the thing that you
Mhm.
have to do. But it is also one of those other things that is hard to walk because I do think that in some cases there are companies that are going to be looking mostly at Reddit or I was gonna say Team Liquid, but any alternative to Reddit for the other esports, and see what that's saying to bring up people. And that's not necessarily always going to be uh good, but it's obviously not bad. If enough people are saying it, it could just be the silent majority, but it could just the vocal minority, opposite of what I said. But it can be kind of deceiving, absolutely. So you do
Mhm.
want some public credit, absolutely. I think that does sometimes, if not
Yes, it's
often,
important.
yeah, get into the company's ears. Like, okay, maybe raise this guy up, or at the very least, into the peers that you might be working with. It gets into their ears and they can check you out. But it's definitely not the best thing to rely on to actually know where you're at. I actually think it's actually a pretty poor indicator to know where you're at. And much more, I'm with you. I respect the fact that I've been told that I'm easy to work with by multiple people. I like that so much more than someone who says like, "Oh, she has good knowledge, but her Protoss knowledge is bad," or whatever it would be, right? Like, I want to be someone who's easy to work with, who can have fun on the camera, and is well liked by everyone that I was working with, including, the people who were managing it, including I mean, even like the guys holding the camera. I don't want to be the drama queen. I think that's so much more important. But obviously getting those threads can be helpful. Can certainly help you rise as well. I'm not saying don't, if you're up and coming, don't ignore those outlets. Obviously, there's a way to get at least eyes on you, and then you can work from that to improve on these things that we're talking about. But yeah, relying on it, I think, is a trap that a lot of people will fall into, and not just once. I think we'll all fall into it every now and again and be like, "Oh, maybe I didn't do well
Yeah.
enough. No one's talked about me in a while."
I still make mistakes every now and then about this. It's not like once you stop doing it, you stop doing it forever, right? No different than if you're trying to quit a bad habit, let's say like biting your nails. Like you don't just stop biting your nails the next day. It's like just scale it back. I was definitely a person that I prided myself on being easy to work with, and then at one point I realized that because I was kind of lax on that and started taking certain things for granted, I had started developing a reputation that I was a little bit harder to work with, just very subtly over time. And I worked really hard to start correcting that again. That was as recently as like 2 years ago, or 2.5 years ago, where it was like 2019. Someone said like, "Hey, I just want to pass out this information, and I only doing it because I'm your friend." The production people were saying like, we're happy to hire him, but we're not sure which version of him we're going to get, if the one that's like good or hard to work with. And I was like, wow, that's actually really shocking to hear. And so what I did was, obviously went to the source, talked it out, and I said, "Hey, look, I know that words are cheap, so I'm just gonna keep showing up and telling you like that I hear you and I'm gonna fix this. And I want to go back to the beginning where we worked together and we really enjoyed that portion on both sides, right?" And that was blindsided for me because I still enjoyed working with them, and so I had no idea this was happening.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of vigilance is really important, right? That was a good, important moment for me in my career to understand that that could have been a very big inflection point where I could have started turning into the, you've changed, man. Success has changed you. You're no longer the same person I used to like. You used to be a big fan of you. And also, if that still exists today, and someone who's listening to this podcast be like, I worked with him like 2 months ago on this online broadcast during quarantine, and he's full of it because he was hard work. Just talk to me. I'm totally down to fix problems. I do know that I'm not perfect as well. And I think that kind of mentality goes a really long way to fixing that, and also ensuring that you cover your trail. I think everyone's so forward thinking that they kind of don't look back a lot because the industry moves so fast, it's so quick that you have to be you have to reflect and try to do some retrospective in order to improve and hone your craft.
Absolutely. Yeah. It kind of goes into a general discussion about criticism, but it's kind of a scary thing because if that guy just felt like he could never have told you that, then you're still doing it, perhaps. So how do you work with criticism? That is, I'll ask first. How do you give criticism? How have you given criticism, and how
Ah,
in general as an
uh,
idea, how are you supposed to give criticism when things aren't going quite right?
I made a lot of mistakes in this category too. Uh, I used to be way too harsh in my criticism, largely because I gave feedback the way I wanted to receive it or even gave it to myself. I'm a big believer that you should just, if you want to be good at casting, you have to practice talking. Like anytime you talk to somebody is a practice situation. Not that you should be like faking the conversation, like, oh, imagine a camera is on me at all times, and like, all right, ZombieGrub, would you like to tell the audience that, like, if we were off camera, I wouldn't talk to you like that. But the idea is that the more you practice and talk to even yourself, the more that you can be in that proper headspace and flip it on instantaneously. That's like a real secret tip that a lot of people like don't even really like. They probably think about it, but they don't really actually do it. And so I give feedback like that to myself too, very harshly, and just like fix it. Like there's no excuse. Like just stop doing that, or just start doing what XYZ, and you'll save yourself a lot of headache. And I gave that criticism very, very heavily, and some people cannot handle that, and I think that can very easily derail or destroy your relationship if they aren't prepared for that. Because you don't know what they're going through, right? Like they could be going through a crazy difficult time in their personal life, and you don't want to assume that they're in the same headspace or mental space as you are. The second thing is I gave it unsolicited. I would give advice or criticism without people asking for it, and that was also a huge mistake because it was just it just, I mean, this should be fairly obvious that you it's unwelcomed advice, and if it especially if you give it harshly and it lands really wrongly or improperly onto whoever's listening to those words, it's just it creates drama. And so I don't offer advice anymore unless people ask for it. Is the answer, because also, like, put a premium on your time. Don't waste it on people who aren't interested in improving in the same methodology that you are. Like, if they want to improve, let them improve in the way that they can. And if they're like, hey, I will listen to anything you say, I'm an open canvas, paint me like you're a French girl, then by all means, like, throw it out there and let them, like Sully was like that. He's like, please tell me anything I need to know. And I just like gave it to him straight. And he was very open to it. And I don't know if him, broadcasting and like talking about VCT as confident as he is because he talked to me and other people like Van Silly and other mentors in the space. But I'd like to think that it helped. And I think that uh, the lower, or rather the less ego you have as you're approaching this space, especially amongst your colleagues, the the easier it is you'll find it is to climb. A lot of times, I think people have this impression that you have to have like a big ego because they look at Monte Cristo or even like Artosis. He definitely has like this hubris about him that's just great. I love it. Um, or you look at like other really famous commentators like Frosker and LS for League of Legends. They just have this like mystique about them that's like they present their opinions so forwardly and so boldly
Right.
and fearlessly that you almost like are afraid of them and for them. And some people like have this idea that they have to present that, right? And you don't. You really don't. just stick to what you feel like you're good at and what you feel like represents you accurately.
So have you had a problem with a co-caster or someone you've worked with on the desk that was something that they took too long to recognize was a problem? Do you ever to go up to
Oh
someone
yeah.
and kind of go like, "Hey, like you're
Oh
talking
yeah.
over someone a lot."
I've made some really I'm telling you, I've made some really bad mistakes in terms of offering advice, even to the point where like I said things that like I am horrified that I was even capable of saying stuff like that. Like one thing I'll own up to is that um, there was a topic where one of the women that I was working with was kind of lamenting about the fact that for women in the space, like they're unfairly scrutinized for their physical appearance. And there was a conversation that I got involved in and even gave unsolicited advice towards, and it was just rude and uncalled for. And like, it wasn't like she was talking about it to the two, three other people that were there in the room, but like I was not supposed to be part of that conversation because she was mainly talking to another woman. It was just like stupid. Like I was really, I mean, it's things that like I learned a lot. Like it's, I'll admit I'm not perfect socially in terms of a lot of situations, but I learned so much from that instance.
Yeah.
I was just like, wow, I should definitely avoid doing that in the future. So, I'm really thankful that, I apologize to her like profusely in private. And I was just like, I can't believe I said that. I'm such an idiot. And thankfully she was like, that's totally, I like, look, I get it, you meant well, and I'm not going to take it personally, I'm not going to like cancel you or anything. This was a long time ago, so I don't think it was even during the time where like people would come out with these kinds of things. um but yeah, I've definitely messed up a lot in this category. So
Yeah.
if you ever have any questions in particular, you can always ask me privately and specifically about like what was said, and how can that be conveyed in a better manner.
Right, exactly. I mean, so much of this is actually learning how to approach people, and there's actually an art form to giving critique. I mean, that sounded a bit more like joining on a conversation that was, as you said, you weren't really a part of. But in general, giving critique is actually something that people should learn, and I feel like a lot of I can't think of any time in K through 12 education that I was taught how to give critique. Aside from, the whole like kindergarten, like just be nice. If you have nothing nice to say, don't say it. That's not gonna
Right.
help you.
Compliment sandwiches.
Exactly. Well, yeah, that's but what I really learned how to critique is when I went to art school. But anyways, like it's not something
Ah.
that we teach, and that's why I feel like a lot of people do it clumsily. And it's also something that I think because it's not taught, we also don't take it necessarily super well. Like a lot of people don't. Some people are gifted with a natural ability to take criticism, even the harshest criticism, well. And I'm like, good for you, man, but I can't. But then also, to give good critique is the other thing, because there's one thing to be able to go up to someone and be like, "Look, I don't mean anything bad by this, but you're just kind of bad. Like, just fix it." Like that's not helpful, even though you're being kind of nice about it.
Right.
And it's
I
another
don't like
thing.
that. It's like, okay.
Yeah, exactly. And it's nothing to be like, "Hey, I
Mm.
think this might be something that's causing this problem. And maybe you could try this," right? Because critique is usually the best when it's given with, first of all, friendly manner, but then second of all, when it's given a solution, as opposed to just being like bad, get better. No one likes being called bad and then
Yes.
fix it. Just be good. How hard is it? Um,
Right.
but it's actually something I think is really critical to anything in life, but especially when it comes to soft skills, as we refer to it, like there's no 2 + 2 = 4. That's great. If someone says it's 3, they're fucking wrong. If someone is like, look, I think you need to know more about the game, you could theoretically be like, no, I think I'm doing fine because people like that I'm getting excited about things that I don't know anything about. And it's like, ooh, it's like, I think you should know more about the game though. I feel like we're getting close to the whole like you have to know this thing. But fairly enough, some people just won't care. So, anyways, yeah, criticism is very difficult. It's something that all of us have to learn to take and to give. Because I think the final point I want to make about this criticism thing is that at some point it is affecting the broadcast, right? And that's where it needs to be said. No one wants to be the bad guy, even if you're super, super nice about it. But at some point, someone has to be like, look, you're talking over everyone else. Look, you're not doing this correctly. you're breathing in the mic and you refuse to, like, things that could be even very technical and easy to change, and then no one wants to bring it up because no one wants to be the bad guy. That's a very difficult social conundrum, in my opinion, that I also try to work with. So recently, I've been, if I have something that I think needs to be changed, I've been trying to approach the person and say, "Hey, do you want feedback?" Right? And
Yeah.
basically, I feel like it's almost a test as well. And people I've done this to, maybe listening to this podcast, being like, "Oh shit, she tested me. Oh my god." But if they say no, I'm gonna be like, "All right, okay, well, that's fair, but
Yeah.
damn it, like, you probably should say yes." But anyways,
Yeah.
but if they say yes eagerly, that already is pointing towards good things for them, right? And good things for us as we work together
Mhm.
as well. But you got to ask first. And it is a bit of a test.
Yeah.
If you
Yeah.
say no, it's like, oh, don't say no, but also be careful. Sometimes advice is bad. No, probably, definitely the case. But
Yeah, you know
anyways,
how like if you're trying to get good at a game, the easiest way is to get a group of friends that want to improve together. I think that usually is the most proven successful way for me to get good at a game quicker. Is to just surround yourself with like-minded peers. Like maybe they're all different ranks. Like you're at platinum trying to get the diamond, or they're at masters trying to get the GM. But the important things that you're all trying to improve. And I think that if you find another, like not necessarily just a casting pair duo, right? People are kind of obsessed and focused on that. Like, who's my duo partner? But just like a group of people that you want to improve with in general and willing to pass that on. Don't let go of that. That's so hard to find, especially if they're loyal to you, right? Like if you're like helping each other, but also trying to compete with each other, that's a little bit of a weird dynamic going on. But yeah, finding those colleagues and peers that really want to, trade secrets and hone their craft together and refine. Iron sharpens iron, and I think that's like a really great thing that you've kind of communicated. Like finding people who are willing to give and open to receive, and learning to work with your team. And more importantly, too, like you're gonna find out who's casting these events with you, your talent team, and you hit them up, you exchange notes, don't like hide stuff from them. Help point things for them, right?
yeah,
Like, hey, in these upcoming series, like I'm not sure, if this was brought up. This person has lost 17 times in a row on this map in particular. And like that's a story you should bring up, right? Like, and they're like, once more, they lost number 18 and they choked at the very last second. That kind of stuff I think is really important to like constantly help each other because I also, you kind of succeed and fail as a group. And so I feel like it's really important to develop that camaraderie.
yeah, that was one of the things that I heard about, that people would be like secretive about their note taking because they wanted to be the one to say the smart thing. And I was like, "Ooh, that sounds just like." I mean, first of all, StarCraft people don't really take a whole lot of notes, but then second of all, we're always talking to each other about the stories anyways. So nothing really kept secret. But there's even a time where I pointed out to people at Katowice that, like, hey, there's actually not been a tournament finals without a Protoss here, except that one weird year where only foreigners could participate. And Maynard brought it
Right.
up on camera, and he didn't have to credit me, but he did. But even if he didn't, I'd be like, yeah, my point got brought up. I'd be excited that someone just brought it up because I thought it was actually really interesting. And then coincidentally, defying the odds, a Protoss did make it to the finals. So then I got to latch onto it afterwards and be like, see, it's like a curse almost, or a blessing if you're a Protoss player, I
Right.
suppose. But he did credit me, and that was nice, but it was unnecessary. But I
Yeah.
just can't imagine an environment that's not like that. And it's honestly one of the scarier things about trying to move any other esport is that you hear these stories and you're like, "Oh, what if I come in and I'm like, hey guys, we're all friends, right?" And they're like, "No, go away." Like, I don't want that.
Yeah. I love me some Maynard just as a small side. If I
Yeah.
could go to a Build a Bear workshop, I would build a Maynard and take it home. He's just so warm and cuddly and just great,
Yeah.
and always pays it forward. But yeah, not to get too not to get to become a gossip channel of like, who do you like this person? Do you not like this person? Yeah, I think that kind of stuff is exactly what you brought up, right? Like group storytelling is something that I think a lot of casters don't think about because they talk about like their own ideas, their own analysis, their own tidbits, their own one liners, their own catchphrases. Think as a group. It's really powerful. No different than like is it better to be individually insane at the game, or would you rather have like your 5 teammates be very coordinated, or your 4 teammates be really coordinated with you so you can execute cleanly onto whatever you're trying to do as a strategy? It's always B, right? Like that wins. It's very rare where like a team of individual superstars can pull off something better than a team that's well coordinated.
So I guess taking like, this whole episode actually has been a lot about just like being cool with your peers and wanting them to work with you again, and then apparently vice versa, you want to work with them again. And it
Yeah.
just gets a really nice atmosphere at the very least. Sometimes it doesn't go your way, honestly, like this whole Valorant thing. Sometimes like those people were really talented, they're really nice people. They didn't get picked for it. Kind of sucks, but it happens. But you're also going to feel like a much better person for it too. If any of you are thinking of taking the underhanded way, don't
Yeah,
don't
don't.
do it.
It's not worth it.
It's not worth it.
It's always short term gains for long term, downsides. Just not worth.
Yeah. Well, we're kind of reaching the end of the podcast. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but
Right.
just as we
We
end
got through like
here,
2 questions.
what?
We got through like the
Oh
like
yeah.
Zombie Grub sent over a sheet, and there's like, here's like these list of topics. I'm like, these are all really interesting, and we got through like the first 2 topics.
Yeah, that happens sometimes. For
uh,
like, yeah, I
yeah.
was casting or doing the podcast with Uber, like I mentioned, and it was like a lot of him was telling his story because it's just a fascinating story. And then I had to like squeeze in as much of the questions as possible, and I ended up taking actually like another hour of his time more than I wanted to. But he was really nice about it. Yeah, there's so much to talk about every time I'm like, oh, I wonder if I have enough intel on this person, or if we share similar, or something like that.
Yeah.
It's always like the easiest conversation ever.
For
So
sure. Well, is there any, rapid fire? I'll try to keep it concise. Is there any like questions that you feel like are really pressing that you want to ask, and I can answer it quickly,
oh gosh,
as quick
yeah.
as I can?
Yeah, most of these things are not answered quickly. Okay, well, how about this? So you brought up duos. Do you think duos are the way of the future, or should it be anything goes for caster pairings?
I think duos is the easiest to work with, especially online. I do not like trios for online broadcasting. It is so hard because visual cues are a very big thing when you're working on a tricast. But I do think that there's. I think commentary is an art and not a science, and therefore you can't just say these are the rules that you have to work with, because it's so subjective, right? Like every person is going to appreciate a thing about commentary that's different from their friend sitting next to them. So is it 2 people on a desk? Is it 3 people? Is it 4? Right? Sometimes Korean broadcasts, I listen, they have 4 casters on the desk, and I'm like, I didn't even know, right? Because I don't understand Korean. So like and they all kind of are very elevated, high energy. So sometimes it's a little bit difficult to distinguish, especially if you're not familiar with the language. And so sometimes they even have 4 people on the desk. The answer is that they all can work, but you just have to do it well and tastefully, and also like don't do it always just one way. I think if you do, you're only going to get one kind of audience. So figure out different kinds of opportunities and different kind of pairings, and I think that's what makes it fun to be, a person that works on production side, because you get to play around with all these kinds of formats.
Yeah. And on the same subject, like, do you think that people should be pairing themselves up, to further advance their career, or should you be working with as many
Yeah.
people as possible?
I guess like both are good. I think the pairing yourself with a duo, the reason why people like doing that the most, in my opinion, is because it's the easiest to get better. Because your work, it's no different than, should I be constantly duo queuing with all kinds of people, or should I be duo queuing with one person in a team based game? And the answer is like, what are your goals? Or the preface of that is like, what are your goals to that? Like, are you trying to get really good individually? Are you trying to work on your team synergy? Are you trying to establish yourself as a casting pair so that way people can hire you as a duo? It really depends on your goals. But if your first primary goal is to get good, then yes, I would say cast with one person and work on them together, work on the craft together and lab things out. Practice casting on OBS together over a YouTube VOD. Like that kind of stuff is really valuable. If you're trying to get your name out there, you're trying to expose yourself to different styles, you're looking for inspiration, you feel like you hit a wall, work with a bunch of different people, different kind of styles, different kind of teams, different kind of settings even, and you might be surprised by what you find.
Do you think that every pair should have a play-by-play and a color commentator, or can it be more mixed?
Oh, oh man, this topic is another hour episode. So, the most concise I can make it is exactly what I said before: is that casting is an art and not a science. I personally believe the best commentators can do either, and the reason being is because a lot of times game tension is randomly broken in esports because it's not entirely obvious. There's no one central point of focus most of the time. If you look at sports, everyone follows the ball in like a game of football, either American football or international football. Everyone's just looking at the ball. It doesn't really matter like what happens. Everyone kind of understands that. But in the game, let's say StarCraft, your expertise, there's just a lot of stuff happening on screen. You never know if there's someone's dropping the base while also pressuring the front, or they're expanding. They're doing a secret expansion in the corner of the map. Like there's all these different kinds of like stories that you can tell, and so you have to be versatile and very spontaneous. And also because there's very rare amounts of games that are on the market where it's like time based. Maybe like Rocket League and Counter-Strike / Valorant. They're time based, so you do have that ability to naturally kind of gravitate towards something. But in a lot of games, it's just like the game ends when it ends. Like it could be 20 minutes, it could be an hour, it could be 3 hours. So you have to be like very versatile with how you cover stuff. Um, and so whenever I work on a game in particular that I know that I'm going to be doing a lot of, I want to be capable of both. I personally have a bone to pick with play-by-play casters who say they don't have to play the game in order to cast it. Like I really don't believe that. I always take pride that I hit a respectable rank to show that I'm within a certain percentile of the game where they can trust what I'm saying, at least at a baseline level. And so if it's like StarCraft, I would want to at least be Masters. Well, Masters is like a lot harder now than it was back then, especially with how good everyone's gotten. But like I was a Masters in StarCraft, legend, top legend in Hearthstone, like top 200. Hitting Grandmasters in Teamfight Tactics. These kind of things. Like I want to be good enough so that people can respect that. Also, so that I respect myself too when I'm trying to go out on a limb and just say like, wow, like that's like a big misplay, because you
Hmm.
have to be able to say those things. And if you don't play the game, you won't know. So
Yeah.
it's really important that you're able to outline it, unless it's like fairly obvious, right? Like they do something like really self-sabotaging, and that speaks for itself.
Right. Perfect segue then. How good at the game do you think you have to be before you start getting good at casting?
Uh, I would like to say that you have to be in the top 1 percentile, because you should at least be smarter than 99% of the people in the room. If you're
Wow.
put in a room with 100, like they always say, if you get put with, in a room of 100 random people, what would you be the most knowledgeable at, right? And so I want to do that because esports is not a random group of people. When they tune in, it's very deliberate what they want to watch. There's so much content in gaming for people to consume that if people take time out of their day to watch a tournament broadcast of their favorite game, it's not going to be a random selection. So you have to be knowledgeable than at least 99% of the people that show up, in my opinion. Otherwise, there's just going to be a growing segment of people who just be like, I can't trust them. I can't trust what they say. But there's always one person that's like, well, actually, they're not entirely right. In fact, they're completely wrong in this one situation. I think that's okay. So top 1 percentile is probably what I aim for.
It's a very high bar, by the way.
It's what I aim for, right? You can't always get there, but at
Yeah.
least you try to pursue it. And there's definitely some areas where like, some games, I think that because it's so knowledge based, there are exceptions. I think MOBAs are one of them. Like League of Legends, I don't think you have to be like in the top 1 percentile to like be qualified to cast, but I think it helps a ton, and I think it's also reflected in who is perceived to be good analysts or people who are reputable in the game.
Well, I think that does it for things that are somewhat yes or no dependent. So I'll ask the final question here from our for
Yeah.
Patreon. And this one may be kind of they asked when they were laughing about it, so I'll take that as you will.
Okay.
Explain the ESGN wheel. Which, I mean, first
Okay.
explain what that whole, I guess,
Sure. Sure.
segment was, because there's a lot of people who don't remember ESGN.
So the ESGN wheel. So I mentioned that I worked at a German startup company that wanted to be like a news outlet for esports, right? The ESPN of esports. That's been tried dozens of times before that, and has been tried dozens of times after that. even by ESPN themselves. That's what I was working on, ESGN. So for our shows that we did, our tournaments, we decided to make it more like a game show. And so we had a random wheel that would like determine outcomes of whatever they would do. So matchups is the most common thing. People would come up and they would spin the wheel. The wheel had faces of all the competitors there in the studio that day. And whoever it landed on would be competitors that you played. And so it was like it was a really good idea and concept to try to make it more, especially if you're pre-recording, you can cut out the awkwardness and make it really like snappy, make it fun, and like you don't know what's gonna happen. Is the wheel rigged? Right? Like we had moments where like the wheel was covered up in all the possible selections, so the contestant would reveal their choice after the wheel stopped spinning. But the big joke was that everything on the wheel was the same person, and they were destined to fight that go head to head versus their rival that's been faded. Like, oh, look at that, we rigged it. A lot of tongue in cheek opportunities to be snappy. For some reason, our editor did not get the message that it was supposed to be fast. And so they would leave like this very awkward 45-second wheel spinning segment where it just would do takes and cuts of everyone watching the wheel spin. And the wheel was not exactly designed to stop spinning very quickly, so it just would keep spinning and spinning and spinning, and the rudder was like not reducing the momentum at all. And so it was like this really awkward, like in real life it actually lasted for like 90 seconds, and I was like, okay, they'll cut it to be like 10 seconds at most. And it was just like this 1 minute long awkward silence where everyone's just standing there with the statue of David pose, where they're kind of like, like they're just covering themselves because no one knows what to do with their hands. It's an esports podcast. We're used to holding our controllers and keyboards and mice. Like no one knows what to do with their hands. So it was really awkward, and we tried fixing it for future episodes, but we got canceled.
Yeah.
Never a chance to redeem ourselves.
Yeah. I think what most people remember from ESGN, or at least what I personally remember, was that you guys hired basically like booth babes to just stand next to the wheel as like the what's her face and like Jeopardy would do, right?
Mm-hmm.
But
Wheel of Fortune.
Yeah, Wheel of Fortune. Yeah, sorry, but like what decision? Whose decision was that? And like, how did it play out for you guys?
It's just a classic. Like people come from the sports world, people come from traditional broadcasting mediums, and say, "This is the way broadcast sells." Sex sells. And they're not wrong, right? Like it's nice to have attractive people around. I don't think any human on the planet would deny that. It's just nice to have them around, but like obviously was it a good fit for the broadcast? Maybe if you're looking for a good laugh years down the road, which most people do when they know about what happened, they bring it up and they're like, "Oh, remember that? Like what happened there?" And I'd be like, "It's funny to laugh about." During that time, I didn't know what to do, and I was just trying to follow the production people's orders. So this is definitely like one of those examples where you often see esports experts, especially like talent and people involved in production, they keep saying like non-endemic people come to the space and kind of plop their ideas onto the table and expect people to eat it as if it's like some fine cuisine, when in reality it's like this old, kind of grow and mold type of like model that's represented in this like metaphorical dish, and it's just not great. It's outdated. People don't like it. People don't want to eat it. And I think that kind of mentality really needs to stick, where we should be hiring more internal endemic people. If I could kind of take this last couple minutes to talk about what's happening in Hearthstone esports right now. Blizzard was announced right before the holidays that their Hearthstone esports team is going to get let go. And it was really sad for me. But not all of them. A few really important people stayed, and I love them. But like, what really hurt was our director, our technical director and producer, was a former competitive Hearthstone player. He even played in one of the championships, and during that championships, tried to apply for a job because he recognized that's what he wanted to do. And he's like constantly a top 100 player on ladder. And the fact that he's like my producer is such a boon that people don't understand, because and Zombie knows this too. You have to explain so much to producers who don't get your game or even don't even understand the space, right? So, the fact that he was involved so deeply, he was in the community, he means with the rest of us, he grinds the game. And the fact that he got let go and he's not going to be working this year on the product unless ESL decides to hire him is a true tragedy. And I think that it's reflected in the fact that in general, these people are not valued high enough. And they add so much to the broadcast that people who are cutting the checks and looking at the black line versus the red line do not understand because they don't get that, on the ground, bootstrapped experience where you get to see the difference of working with someone like that versus not. So if I could, kind of like echo the same thing that almost every talent in the industry across the space will say is just give these endemic gamers a chance. It's so like, do you know that for game publishing studios, they don't hire they don't hire game designers to teach them physics for their game engine. They hire physicists to and then teach them game design because it's so much easier to do one versus the other. And the reason why is because physics is such a nuanced, like advanced concept that you can't teach game designers who never study physics to understand physics, right? It just takes too long. And it's the same concept in esports. There's people who like come to the space and think they can learn everything so quickly. And the reality is there's so much nuance and in-depth details that you need to understand that it's going to take forever to get them caught up to speed. And by the time we start, like there's going to be so many problems in the events. They're like, oh, we'll know for next time. But next time there's even more problems that come up. But if you get someone that's endemic, teach them how to push a switcher in the backstage and type up a run of show and make the call line. That's not hard at all. And you're pretending like that's like some kind of crazy advanced degree rocket science that requires like 5 years in education. It's not that complicated what you do. Hire endemic people in the space and stop getting these buffoons from out of the industry who think they know what they're doing simply because they failed upwards into whatever sports or medium broadcast that they succeeded in because of nepotism or any other reason. It's embarrassing and it's completely destroying a lot of integrity for the broadcast and the industry at large.
That came from the heart. Yeah. I totally agree, though, of course. Like, I think we could.
Yes,
we could-
I'm
No,
preaching to the choir,
yeah.
and I think everyone who watches this probably agrees as well. But if I could reach one extra ear who is on the fence about it that has influence or sway on that subject, please, I'm begging you. It's
Yeah.
so important.
I think we could go through a lot of stages, especially Blizzard, and talk about this. Honestly, including up to recently with StarCraft no longer getting development. But we had kind of that thing happen with about 2 years ago when they let go of a lot of the top talent, the guys who were paid the most because they've been here the longest, but also the ones who understand the scene, of course. But they got let go because they could just bring up a guy who was working kind of like the grunt work and just be like, "You now are the visionary," and they're like, "Oh, I'm not prepared." So we had that. Hearthstone apparently has had that now. A punch for the games have had that, I'm sure. But I know, maybe it came from the heart because of all the recent stuff that's been happening with Hearthstone. So I'll just kind of, end it with this, which is that I was really glad when we moved over to ESL. I was so glad we were not a part of the package with Overwatch League and Hearthstone actually that went to YouTube. Not just because I don't think we would have survived on YouTube so well, but also because that meant that we had, Apollo, who literally is coming from StarCraft, but then,
Yeah.
obviously has been doing wonders in other esports as well in his position at ESL. And we knew that he would take care of us in a way that Blizzard wasn't capable of. They didn't give us enough, men basically, enough people to work with. So we felt a lot better. What is the Hearthstone? What is your opinions on the recent move for you guys? You guys are now being also run by ESL.
Yeah. It's been tough. I think that we lost like 90% plus of our viewership, and most people, and discoverability is really poor because on YouTube it's extremely algorithm driven, and therefore if you don't understand it, which the esports team clearly did not, because one, they were understaffed, so they didn't even have someone in that position to understand it, and second of all, like learning that process takes a lot of time because you have to really be in the nitty gritty, and they're focused on running the esports program, not like learning how to game the YouTube algorithm stuff to get people to click and stay. And so there's actually a lot of like sabotaging factors at work where it's just like it was doomed to fail the first year the way it has been. And it's not on a lot. So I actually get a lot of flack because people feel like I'm not harsh enough on the Hearthstone esports team when like the rumor has it is that they didn't even know until after the deal was signed the day of. Like they found out the deal was signed and they're like, okay, now you have to fix this or like run with it. And so we lost everything. We lost everything. We lost our channel. We lost our history. We lost our subscribers to previous on the Twitch channel. We lost the ability to have drops, right? People love like free drops and like these kind of activations. That's huge in Hearthstone, the card game. We lost that ability. It's like all these different factors. And as a result, we kind of lost a little bit of player buy-in. Like players were not as interested in the thing. So some players who got relegated from the pro league, they're like, I'm actually kind of relieved that I don't have to participate in this. And that, it just feels really, really bad when that happens because the game is great. And also, if you look at it, like the developers, they've done more for the game than ever before. If you're a casual fan and just like to play the game every now and then, it's never been a better time to be a Hearthstone fan. But like as a Hearthstone esports fan, it's brutal. It's really brutal. I have confidence that the people that are in place right now will do what they can to continue to improve the situation. But it's hard not to be discouraged, just because of all the hard work that's been put in. Right, a lot of us have put like a lot of time and effort to try to grow the community in different ways, and it just feel like in some ways, like you mentioned, we just kind of got swept in the deal, kind of thrown in. And and what's really sad is that some of the people who worked that deal don't even work at Activision Blizzard anymore. They don't even work on the esports side. It's like, oh, geez, like it's so frustrating when some of these suits that make those calls don't even have to be accountable for it because they can't be. They don't work there anymore.
Yeah. It's
Ah,
frustrating to be a Blizzard fan right now. I don't think anyone's really avoided being a bit harsh, even the Overwatch guys have had. Will try and speak their mind, but obviously the YouTube transfer is going to be a really difficult thing for them, and they had put all of their manpower into doing it for Overwatch, which is only somewhat successful. They still also lost, like they went from like 100,000 ish to like down to 70,000, as far as I recall, when they're supposed to be growing because Overwatch League has been around for
right,
now three,
because it's
going on
so
4 years.
big and costly.
Yeah, exactly. And then of course it just was like, I didn't realize, how bad it had gotten for you guys, but I figured like, oh, they're probably not going to get the same treatment. And of course, StarCraft, if we had gone over, wouldn't have been the same. I think we got a bit lucky with the fact that the Korean portion to GSL came because of them not being part of. Well, and it's a whole thing, but the Korea portion is on YouTube. It's the end of the point.
Right,
I think we got a bit lucky there because they did already have that discoverability. Like Tastosis, Cast StarCraft is already something that's like, we YouTubed a fucking thousand times. And they already were on YouTube for the majority of things because they also work with Afrika. But anyways, yeah, we got lucky not to be brought over with you guys, honestly. I think we would have been treated perhaps even worse if that's possible, as it sounds like they're treating everyone but Overwatch not very well. That's, I guess, to sum it up nicely. But I feel like things would look up with ESL. And one of the biggest differences for that, right, is that whereas Blizzard is a game making company that is apparently also trying to push esports, but like only one of them. So like I don't know. ESL is a esport tournament company, right? Like they want to put on good tournaments and get viewership there and sponsors there. Whereas for Blizzard, it was a lot of the like we sold our box, now we can let you guys go. So I don't know if you guys feel hopeful, but I would hope that you guys do, and I hope that ESL takes care of you because I feel like they have been taking care of us. Um, yeah, I just wanted to end on, I guess, a
yeah.
hopeful note.
Totally. Again, I don't hold anybody at ESL responsible or anything like that. And you bring up a really good point. If there's one company that feels like they could pull something like that, I have a lot of faith in ESL. And so hopefully like 2021, especially with some of the big changes coming to Hearthstone this year with the core set making it a lot more affordable for everyone.
Mm.
And like helps bring a lot of the interest back. And I love the game. I actually made a very infamous tweet, or I get memed a lot in the community because last year they brought us to a summit and revealed a lot of the details that they're going to be planning for the next year. And so I kind of like made this sweeping statement like, wow, the passionate devs is going to make Hearthstone stay around and cement it for the next decade. And then a bunch of controversial stuff happened, and people were like, oh, yeah, cement it for the next decade, huh? And that just became like this giant meme anytime any positive or negative news came out, that people just type in a one word comment cemented. And I personally believe it'll be around for a long time and outlive a lot of the current esports that are out here. And I really hope so because I don't want it to just get, here's like the same treatment as Here's a Storm, where just like one day everyone's like looking forward to the next step. And then all of a sudden they get the bad news that the program closed. we'll see. Time will tell, but I remain optimistic, just like you do.
Yeah. I think there's one thing that's also certain is that everyone that we work with, I would say their talents and tournament organizers actually work with all of the very passionate people who are left at Blizzard or who were at Blizzard and have left. Like every time I've ever talked to anyone from any of the esports, Heroes of the Storm especially, actually, it was nothing but praise for how all the developers um, were talking about it, and they were so passionate about that game. We had trouble keeping our guys playing StarCraft. They were all playing Heroes. So it's like it seems like such a cliche stereotype, like just blame the man in the shadows type thing, but it really is just like there are so many passionate people on the ground, and it's suits up top that are just comparing numbers. So it's the way of the world, but esports is, I guess, gotten to this point based off those passionate people. So you can only hope that it continues to thrive with them as well. But I guess that's a kind of a weird point to end on. It's kind of hopeful, but a little bit sad as well. I don't know. But yeah, I really enjoyed talking with you, Frodan. Thank you so much for being candid on
Of
some
course.
things. Getting some honest truths here, and just for giving me some of your time. It's been a really fun podcast.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me. Thanks for hosting this. I think this is important. It's a little difficult trying to like vocalize these things, especially because you don't really get to talk about it very much. You definitely can't talk about it when you're on someone's when you're working for a client, right? You can't be bringing this up during a BlizzCon cast. Social media is a little bit hard to kind of talk about it because it's very people kind of take text and then read things out of context, and it's really difficult. So this kind of platform is really nice because we get to convey with our voice, which is what we're great at. That's the main tool that we use to communicate. So I appreciate you a lot for having me on. And if you choose to end up doing like a second round with other people, maybe we can tackle the second half of this document.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's definitely in the plan. Even back to episode 2, I was like, we should do another one. I'll probably get around to it, honestly. So expect a
Okay,
message from me in the future. Yeah.
excellent.
Thanks again. Thanks to you guys out there who enjoyed the podcast. Check out the Patreon. Please check out Frodan and all the things that he does. Super awesome dude. And we'll catch you for the next podcast episode. Bye.